At Arizona's Children's Association, we fully recognize the value of empowering and uplifting youth in their transition to adulthood, and that's why we're all here today. Today's content will be focused on overviews of cutting-edge trends and knowledge bases in the fields of child welfare, foster care, behavioral health, and neurodevelopmental research. My hope is that this experience will allow you the opportunity to share and gain new insights and information, helping us all to improve the work that we do with the youth in our communities. So thank you again for being here, and I also want to thank several people that made today work. I want to thank the Tucson Jewish Community Center for housing today's conference. We appreciate the support of President and CEO Todd Rockoff. Director of Arts and Culture Lynn Davis, and a special thank you to the events coordinator Martha Milan. I also want to thank the Arizona's children's staff. They worked really, really hard to pull this off, so thank you, everybody over there. And importantly, I also want to thank our sponsors. Our youth empowerment sponsors were the Marshall Foundation and Tucson Jewish Community Center. Our youth activist sponsor was La Frontera. Our supporter sponsors, Simpatico Integrated Care, Children's Action Alliance, Cope Community Services, Devereaux, Arizona, Geico, Mindful Destinations, Tucson Unified School District, and Ombudsman Schools. Also, thank you to Thoroughbred Nissan, Jim Click Automotive Group, and Simpatico Integrated Care for providing some scholarships for some of our attendees here today. Thank you to all of these wonderful sponsors for their support and recognition of the importance of empowering Arizona's youth. I'd like now to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Dr. Mary Ann Judkins. Hold on. I'll tell you a little bit more about her. She's a former junior high science and mathematics teacher, and for more than 12 years, she has worked at the University of Arizona's College of Education as a trainer, coach, and training coordinator on 3 federal grants focused on improving school climates. Through her work, Dr. Judkins has had the opportunity to expand her knowledge of adolescent brain development, learning, and behavior. She's provided training on topics such as leadership, team development, positive behavioral interventions and supports, bullying prevention, and the adolescent brain. Welcome, Dr. Judkins.
Good morning! Good morning. That was great. Okay, I gotta take this mic off because I'm a walker. All right. I was worried that there wasn't enough coffee out there, so thank you for that welcome. I want to thank Arizona's Children's Association for inviting me here today and organizing this conference. The topics are amazing, and I think you're going to get so much out of today, and it's an honor to be up here to help kick it off. So thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. And I want to thank all of you for a couple of things. First, thank you for your care and commitment to the adolescents in our state. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much. That wasn't a very resounding applause. Okay, well, the other reason I want to thank you is for being here today to try to kind of expand your knowledge and skills, but also kind of reflect on what you already know and do with the adolescents that you work with. And this is a great opportunity for you to network with a lot of other people who have that same care and commitment to our youth. So thank you for being here, and I hope you really, really enjoy your day. So I've been an educator for 23 years. I started as a junior high math science teacher, as Denise mentioned already, and people thought I was crazy. Junior high. The junior highs that I taught at were 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. But I'll tell you, that's where I learned about the fascinating adolescent brain. It is fascinating. If you think about it, it can drive you crazy. Yes, yes, but it is quite fascinating. And no 2 days are ever the same, right? Some days, having to navigate all the mood changes and the relationship changes and the way that they can make decisions some days and not others, and it keeps you on your toes, right? That's what I loved about teaching junior high, is because it was exciting. It was an adventure, and I never knew what to expect. I guess I thrived on that. And some people thought I was crazy for it, but I don't know. I think it takes that specialness to be able to work with our adolescents and be patient with them. Mountains of patience, correct? Yes. So I taught junior high school, and then I have worked for the last almost 13 years now at the University of Arizona, and I was able to work with a lot of schools throughout the state on school climate issues and implementing programs and strategies to help them reduce violence and substance use and also improve their school climates. And through my work, I was able to kind of dig in a little deeper into this fascination I had with the adolescent brain. I had time, I had opportunity, I had resources available to me at the university. So I did a lot of reading, I went to conferences and I learned what I could about the brain. I worked with one of the neuroscientists at the University of Arizona on a project where we collaborated with science teachers and counselors to teach high school students neuroscience, teach them about their brains. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later because I think that's an important thing. If we can get our kids to understand what's going on in their brains, that'll help them. So I had that opportunity, and I am pleased to be here to share a little bit about what I know about the adolescent brain, and an even smaller amount what the neuroscientists know about the adolescent brain, but I hope to not overwhelm you too much. And I am going to be asking for volunteers later. So be ready to volunteer. And I'm looking at the back row. Because these brave souls here, I'm going to give them a break. So back row, be ready. Because if you don't volunteer, you're going to be voluntold. Haha. Okay. So as I mentioned, a lot of people thought, I tell people, I was a junior high school math science teacher, and they went, is this what you have to deal with? Yeah? Sometimes you feel this way? Sometimes? Okay. I said, no, really, it's not like that. It's not out of order. It's just under construction, right? Have you ever felt this way? Yeah, you think you felt this way? What about the adolescents? When it happens to them, they're thinking clearly and then all of a sudden they're not. Do you remember what that was like? It never happened to me. I just don't remember. Okay, so Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman are the creators of the Zits comic, one of my favorite comics in the whole world, because they capture adolescent life so perfectly. They are perfect with it. And so you're going to see some of their cartoons that they gave me permission to use throughout the day today. But we are here today to talk about that wonderful transition from adolescence to adulthood. But what do we mean by adolescence? I think if I asked you to respond to that question, I'd get, how many people do we have here? 100 and some odd, 70 something? Different answers, I bet. Here's how some people define it. It's that awkward period between sexual maturation and the attainment of adult roles and responsibilities. Well, that clears it up. No, this is how some neuroscientists define adolescence. So that could be anywhere from like 12 to 18. Well, when they're 18, they graduate from high school, they're adults, right? They're perfectly ready for their adult lives. No, some people say 21. If you ask some neuroscientists, based on the brain development, they will tell you mid-20s. So those of you who are in your mid-20s or below, Pay close attention. Okay, so that's where we're coming from today. And now we'll dig into this just a little bit more. So what is going on in the brain during adolescence? Neuroscientists know a lot, mostly because the technological advances in the last 15 years, but it's still quite a mystery. And this is what fascinates me. It's changing all the time. And I can't tell you how many adults that I talk to where they say this. By the time they are, fill in the blank, years old, they should be able to, they should know or know how to, or they should be able to do. Have you heard this? Have you caught yourself saying these things? I have. I'm guilty. I admit. I think it to myself. And you know why we say these things? Because sometimes they can, right? And then sometimes they can't. The last grant that I was working on, we worked with all high schools throughout the state, and I cannot tell you how many high school teachers I said, by the time they're 16 years old, they should know how to behave in the classroom. Well, it's not that easy. It's a little more complicated than that. And I think what frustrates us and makes us so crazy about this is that some days they are able to. They do know, and they can do whatever it is, and then the next day they don't. And we want them as adults, we want them to be consistent, and we want them to do these things regularly because we don't remember what it was like in adolescence. We've blocked that part out. Those connections have been cut. But I'm here today to help remind you all of that and to help you kind of think of ways to work with kids that will help with this. So let's get into the brain anatomy. Everybody have your caffeine or whatever it is that keeps you awake? I'm telling you, yeah, hold on. I'm gonna be sharing with you a little bit about the brain. And maybe you already know some of this. I'm only gonna share a small piece. It's much more complicated than what I'm gonna tell you, but I want it to be useful for you. Make sense? Okay? You ready? Okay, here we go. Here's the brain. When we think of the brain, we think of this wrinkled thing, blob there, with all those folds and right? Well, they have identified certain areas of the brain, which they refer to as lobes, that are responsible for key processing. So, for example, up here in the front is the frontal lobe, and more specifically, the prefrontal cortex. You're going to be hearing me say this a lot. Prefrontal cortex. This is responsible for helping us process when we plan, we make decisions, when we control our impulses, judgment. Would it surprise you to know that the prefrontal cortex is one of the last parts of the brain to develop? It's all making sense now. Okay, then the parietal lobe, which is kind of here up on the top, and it is responsible for processing the senses that we take in, the stimulus that we take in. It's also responsible for helping us process our language and attention, paying attention. The occipital lobe is for processing the vision. And last but not least, on the sides right here is the temporal lobe. And it is also helpful in processing more complex visual stimulus that we get. But also hearing, and what's related to hearing? Speech. So that's where that processing happens. We good? I don't see anybody zoning out yet. All the phones are away. That's good. Okay. So I'm going to point out just a few more key parts of the brain that are crucial in understanding what's going on with adolescence. First, the hippocampus and amygdala are kind of tucked in the middle, and the cerebellum, which is in the back here. Those three parts work together to form what's called the limbic system. Hippocampus is responsible for memory storage. The amygdala processes emotions. It controls our emotions. helps us take it, it helps decide with the stimulus that we get if it's dangerous or not. And it's responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response. The amygdala. This is in high gear in adolescence. It's working really well, the amygdala. It is, okay? Remember this. We'll hear about the amygdala a lot. And then the cerebellum is the other part of the brain that is one of the last ones to develop. It's responsible for coordination and movement. Ah, those awkward teenagers. The coordination, sometimes a challenge. Okay. The brainstem, can anyone tell me what the brainstem does? Shout it out. What? Shout it out.
Breathing and heart rate.
It's our vital functions, breathing, heart rate. We also refer to this part of our brain as the primitive brain. This is what we function from when we are extremely stressed. Okay? That's where all of our energy goes to, is the brainstem, and that's how we function. I'll be coming back to that again later too. And the brainstem and the amygdala work very closely together, and that makes sense if we're talking about stress, responding to stress. And then the prefrontal cortex, which I already told you about, is the other piece of the brain that is one of the last ones to develop. Judgment, impulse control, planning, decision making, those sorts of things. Okay, you okay? Here's a funny about the prefrontal cortex. The what? The prefrontal cortex is the section of the brain responsible for emotional control, impulse restraint, and rational decision making. According to the article, it doesn't fully mature until a person is in his late teens or early 20s. Does anybody know a good way to get transmission fluid stains out of an antique gravy boat? If he lives that long. You ever felt that way? Okay, yes, deep breath. Do any of you take like yoga or meditation? This could be helpful for you in your work, right? Deep breathing, okay. Yes, we do get frustrated by some of the things that they do, but we have to continually tell ourselves what is going on in the brain. What is going on in the brain? Okay. Now, I told you about the brain parts, but now we're going to dig even deeper. It's pretty. It's a neuron. It's a nerve cell. Our brains are made up of billions of these neurons, and they're made up of three main parts. And I'm telling you this for a reason. Don't tune me out yet, okay? The cell body is up at the top there, and inside that cell body is the nucleus, okay? I have a biology degree. I taught science. Who can tell me what the nucleus does? Okay, DNA has, oh, yes.
It's like the brain center of a cell, it tells what it does.
Yes, it tells the cell what to do. It has the instructions for what the cell is supposed to do, okay? That's important. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Then, sticking out from that cell body, they look like little fingers. Those are called dendrites. And those dendrites reach out to another nerve cell so they can talk to each other. And then the last part is this long, skinny part right here. It's called the axon. And here at the end, the axon, this is what reaches out to the dendrites of another nerve cell so they can talk to each other. It'll all become much clearer in just a moment. There are 2 times in our life when we have more neurons than at any other time. One is in utero, where we have a lot more nerve cells than we had at any other time. And what's going on as we're developing is the nucleus has the instructions, and it tells that nerve cell where to go in the brain and what its job is. And so the nerve cell travels to that part of the brain and connects with other nerve cells that have similar instructions. If they don't make it to the right place and they don't make the right connections or strong enough connections, they get absorbed by the brain. That's called pruning. Pruning. When you prune a tree, what are you doing? You're cutting away the kind of the useless parts so the plant or the tree can grow healthier, right? Same thing, same process in the brain. How about, what's the other time, do you think? We have more brain cells than any other time, and the pruning is happening. Adolescence, that's right. Here is a prime time for us to be able to help groom what those connections are going on in the brain. But who do adolescents spend most of their time with? Other like adolescents, right? So all the connections that are being made are being groomed by who they're around. That's why you are so important. No pressure. No, it's good. But this is why. Even though the adolescents are pushing us away sometimes, they don't want us around, it's important for us to stick around so that we can help kind of shape those connections that are being made. Those connections that are being made between the nerve cells is really what is learning. That's what's happening when we're learning, is those nerve cells are making connections. And the nerve cells, they connect in a certain pattern when we do something. The next time you do that same thing or similar thing, those neurons fire in the same pattern. They connect in the same way, and every time that happens, it gets stronger. It gets stronger. So if you only do it once, it's kind of weak. But the more you do it, that's why practice is so important. It strengthens the firing or how those neurons communicate with one another. How many of you think at your own age you can still learn new things? Can you still learn new things? Great. Not everyone's hand went up. I'm disappointed. Yes. Doesn't matter how old you are, you can still learn. We used to think, nope, as soon as you're a certain age, there's no way you can learn anything new, but that is not true. Our brains have what's called neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. We still have the ability to learn. It just takes us longer as we get older because we already have strong connections in our brain. And when we learn something new, it's slightly different. And so new connections have to be made, so it just takes us a little bit longer. Any fans of Mark Twain out there? Keep this in mind. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot one more thing. You can't force learning to happen, right? You can't make kids sit in a seat and they'll just absorb whatever it is you tell them. But you can help create these environments where those connections that you want them to make are being made. There's a book called Sit and Get Won't Grow Dendrites. Remember that title. It was actually for training, how to train people, adults. But I think it has practical application to young people. But anyway, back to Mark Twain. If teaching were the same as telling me I'll be so smart, we could hardly stand it. So remember that. When we're working with our adolescents, you can't just tell them stuff. You have to do other things, which we will get into some more later. Okay. So how exactly do the nerve cells communicate with one another? There are two ways that they communicate. One is electrical. From one end, the cell body, down here are these dendrites sticking out. Remember, sit and get won't grow dendrites. Connecting. When a nerve cell is triggered to fire or send a message, it's an electrical impulse that goes down the axon to the other end. It's electrical. And then, this is a blow up of, this is the end of the axon and the dendrite of another nerve cell. They don't touch. It's chemical how they communicate. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. But, let's see. I think we need a demonstration. You ready? Electrical impulse. Over here, you're going to be my cell body. Okay, so hands up in the air, those are the dendrites. And you can put them down for now if you want while I explain. Right here, this front row. I know I told you I wasn't going to pick on you, but this is easy. Okay, you're the axon. Okay, all the way down here. Okay, it's an electrical impulse. Electrical impulse. When you are triggered, you're going to send the message down this row. You're going to do the wave. Okay, you ready? So hands up. Okay, you just got the signal. Do the wave. Down here, down here, down here. Excellent. That is how they communicate down the axon. Well done. Thank you, front row. Thank you, thank you. Okay. But now the chemical, okay, stay with me. How they communicate chemically, there are chemicals in the neurons called neurotransmitters. Are you hearing a pattern here? Neurotransmitter. Okay. A very common one is dopamine. Does anyone know what dopamine associates with? Pleasure, happiness, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's why I'm using it in this example, so we can be happy. Neurotransmitters are kept in these little pockets in the axon, and what they're going to do is they're going to get released from here and travel over this space called the synapse to a receptor of the next cell, and that triggers the next cell to send the signal, okay? This is what it looks like in a picture. So here's the dopamine, the neurotransmitter gets released, attaches to the receptor, and then when it's done sending the signal, it gets sucked back up by a transporter back into the original cell. Interesting. Now I need some volunteers. I need 4 volunteers. 4 volunteers. Oh, even from the front row. Fantastic. Please come on up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to have this cherry. Okay. You're going to be my receptor. Okay? And you can sit in that chair. You two, I'm going to have you be my dopamine. Sweet. So you get to be happy.
Go to
Here's your dopamine. Here's your dopamine sign so we know who you are. Oh, you're going to be...
Oh, her.
Either way, whoever wants to be dopamine. And then you're going to sit in those 2 chairs over there. Now you're going to be the transporter. Can you just... You're just going to stand right here in front of me.
Okay.
Lucky you. Bunny ears. Sorry. Okay, so this is what happened. Okay, we're going to have 2 nerve cells now. Down on that end, that row right here, you see you? I'm pointing at you, right on the end. You're my 1 nerve cell. Down at the very far end over there, you're the cell body. So you're going to be sending the signal in just a moment. When that signal gets down here, dopamine, that means you're going to get released. You're going to stand up, and you're going to walk over to the receptor over here on the other nerve cell. And you're going to give her a high five. And then after she receives that high five, guess what you get to do? Run. Okay. And when she gives the signal, you'll know what it is when you hear it. When she gives the signal, that's a trigger for you to start the wave down that way. This is our other nerve cell. Okay? Stick out your dendrites. Awesome. Okay? All right, send the signal, and then the wave comes down here. The dopamine gets released. Stand up. Float on over. Woo!
Happy.
Woo! There goes the signal. Awesome. And then that continues along. Wait, we're not done. We have this dopamine just hanging out. So we have the transporter who's going to escort the dopamine back over to their chairs. Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much, volunteers. I'll take your signs back. Thank you very, very much. That was fabulous. Oh, is that clearer now? Okay. Hey, thanks, volunteers. I really appreciate it. And now I see you're more awake. Okay. There are a lot of different neurotransmitters, and dopamine is just one of them. And as we said earlier, it is associated with pleasure, but actually what neuroscientists have found now, it's more related to motivation and enthusiasm. It's not really about pleasure, it's about the anticipation of getting what you want. It's not actually getting what you want, but the anticipation of getting what you want. So that's new. That's something I just learned in the last year. So they're learning new things all the time. Next year, something new will happen, okay? The brain naturally seeks those opportunities where dopamine will be released because we want to be motivated. We want to be enthusiastic about things. Okay, so what does this mean for our adolescents? What do we see them doing? What are some dopamine-seeking behaviors that we see? Okay, drugs may be one thing. Sex. Rock and roll. Yeah, that's right. Throw that in. I'm sorry? Risk-taking in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be bad. Risk-taking we associate bad, but not necessarily. It could be reading a new type of genre of book. It could be picking up a new instrument. Those are risk-taking. Or public speaking. Yeah? Okay? So, but we often, worry about the bad parts of that risk-taking behavior because we see that probably a lot more than not, or we give that more attention. So it's important for us as adults to provide more guided opportunities for them to seek those dopamine-releasing activities in very positive, constructive ways. So how do we do that? Some of the things, and you may already be doing these things, but it's a good reminder. And it also will, if you're doing these things, it'll support what you're doing. You can say, the brain guys say, this works. That's why I'm doing it. Okay, group work. When kids are involved in groups or participate with groups, it actually increases how much dopamine is released. Just doing group work. Because of that sense of belonging that they feel. Using students' strengths and interests and building off of those. Helping them discover the relevance, as opposed to just telling them, well, this is important because, in one ear out the other. If they discover that for themselves, they'll be more motivated. Giving them opportunities to be creative. It doesn't have to be art. It can be music, it can be building something, it can be designing something. There are a lot of different ways kids can be creative. Project-based learning can pull that in. And another thing I really like about project-based learning is it takes different subject areas, so math, science, history, language arts, and pulls it all together into one project so kids don't see them in isolation that often happens in schools. It's pulled together so they can see how it's integrated. Self-directed learning. We have to be careful about this because we have to teach kids how to be self-directed learners. We can't just say, oh, here's an online class, go forth and learn. We have to teach them how to be successful learners in that environment because it's very different than what they have done before. But they can do it, and it can be very motivating for them because they can go at their own pace. So that helps kids of all abilities. Especially those kids that are gifted who get really bored in school. If they're given opportunities to direct their own learning, that will motivate them even more. Play and movement. We do this a lot with elementary school students, but what about adolescents? When I taught math, I'd give my kids sidewalk chalk, and they'd go outside and do math problems on the sidewalk. I got in a lot of trouble for that because it messed up the sidewalks. I said, I don't care. The kids were having fun and they were learning math at the same time. Play and movement. Laughter and music also will help release dopamine. Again, sometimes we cut this out in adolescence, but we can't forget it. Music especially can help us with our mood, right? For a lot of different situations. Okay. How does this help us understand adolescence? I have 10 minutes. I'm going to talk faster now. All right, well, how does this help us understand it? Everything that I've told you, it's not to give okay, where are my adolescents in the room? You can just do a little. This is not an excuse for your behavior, everything you've heard so far. It's not you can't use it as an excuse. Hey, I'm sorry. My prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, so I should not get in trouble. It's not an excuse, but it does help us understand what's happening and where they're coming from, right? So we can better, as adults in the room, we can help guide those connections we want to see in the brain, right? That firing in the right pattern, okay? So it wasn't only humans have to worry about teens getting in trouble. It's true, dinosaurs. Goes way back. This is not from the National Enquirer. This is an actual science article. Well, this is the research article, but it did happen. They found adolescent dinosaurs in one area. There were no adults, no babies, so they made the assumption that the adolescent dinosaurs were in the wrong place. They were hanging out in the wrong place. Okay, well, obviously because they're no longer around. Okay, so what is going on with the adolescent brain? Well, now I said the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and here I'm saying it's working too hard. Well, see, what happens when we're older and our brain is processing all this information, we're not just using one part of our brain to process that information. We're pulling in from a lot of different places to make those decisions. The prefrontal cortex is part of it, but not all of it. We're using other parts of our brain. Adolescents don't have that yet. So they're relying a lot more on their prefrontal cortex than other parts of their brain, and that can be taxing on them. So they're very inefficient at using other parts of their brain. Pruning is still happening. We're still seeing those connections. There may be too much going on in the brain, and so those messages might get jumbled up at times, which is why we see them making good decisions one day and not the other. Because sometimes the firing just goes wrong for just a moment. I hear way too many times from a lot of different people is, adolescents think they're invincible. Okay. Well, there may be some of that, but really what's more is that they think the benefits outweigh the risks. The perceived benefits outweigh the perceived risks. So they think that, that I could get hurt or in trouble, but it'll be a lot of fun and it'll be worth it. Yeah, okay? Those dopamine releasing activities, motivation. And in adolescence, we're also seeing most of our psychiatric or mental disorders emerge, and that's in part because of the pruning that's happening and the new connections that are being made. In fact, a couple of years ago, I read a study about schizophrenia. They're trying to understand schizophrenia, and one of the hypotheses is that the neurons in one part of the prefrontal cortex are not getting pruned fast enough or well enough. And so with schizophrenia, what are some of the characteristics that you see? I'm sorry? Hallucinations. And so that may be attributed to the fact there's so many mixed up, jumbled up connections going on in the brain can't process it, and that's what we see as a result. It's a hypothesis. That's what they think is happening. Okay. Sleep is another big issue that we have with adolescents, and it's not their fault. They're not doing it to upset us. They're doing it because there's changes going on in the brain, and there's what's called a phase delay. Another neurotransmitter called melatonin. Sound familiar? Yep, melatonin. In the brain, as the brain is changing, melatonin gets released. Melatonin makes you feel sleepy. So those of you who have sleeping problems, you take melatonin, right? You feel sleepy. So it gets released later in the brain, 10:30 or later, and then it lingers longer in the brain, which is why they stay up till all hours, and they don't get up till noon on the weekends, and they do the same thing during the weekday if they didn't have school. There are a lot of people, and I keep hearing it every couple of years, advocating for, we've got to start high school later, because their brains are not awake because of the biological stuff that's going on. It's not because they're staying up late because they're partying all the time. They're just staying up late because they can't sleep. They can't get to sleep. So That idea hasn't caught on very well, though, on starting high school later, because there's so many other factors going on. Sports, jobs, those sorts of things. So I think it'll continue to be a conversation. I know that there are some high schools that were piloting a later start time, and I'm curious to find out what their results are. Really need 9 hours of sleep? I'd love 9 hours of sleep. Okay, I'm not sure this is true for all kids, but in general they say 9 hours of sleep is what they need for retuning their brain. The lack of sleep really impacts emotions, that amygdala. Okay, if they can't get those emotions under control, it gets even worse when they're tired. Our brains, because during the day our neurons are firing all the time, they need a break. And that's during sleep is when those neurons retune and they can relax. And that will help them fire faster and better the next day. As the prefrontal cortex is developing, our adolescents are becoming better planners and better worriers, because that's what's happening in the prefrontal cortex. As a result, it makes it hard to sleep, right? If you're worried about something, you're not going to sleep. So what do we do? In a few minutes, okay. Adolescents are often blamed for their lapses and risk-taking more than they are helped to take responsibility for them, pick up the pieces, and go on with their lives. That's why you're here, because you do these things already, right? The big thing I want to mention, stress. I mentioned this earlier because this puts a lot of pressure on two big parts of the brain, the brainstem and the amygdala. They work hard together. The brainstem helps us focus on survival, and then the amygdala gives us that fight, flight, or freeze response. They work really hard when we are stressed out. That's why you see, and the prefrontal cortex is bypassed, because all the energy is going to those other two parts. That's why you see when kids are stressed out, and adults, what happens? They overreact, they may act out, they may actually zoning out is a sign of stress as well. Adolescents may not know that that's what's happening to them. So we need to be able to give them some strategies to help them with that. But when the stress becomes really unmanageable, and I bet you deal with a lot of kids they are under a lot of stress for a number of different reasons. But when that stress becomes unmanageable, all they're concerned about is self-preservation. Learning is not going to happen if they're worried about self-preservation. That's what the brain is telling them. So what can we do? And I'm sure you probably already do a lot of these things. Establishing those norms, rules, and procedures will give them that consistency and safety, giving them opportunities for group work so they have that sense of belonging that can help reduce stress. Providing them with agendas, foreshadowing what is to come so they can plan ahead and they're not surprised by stuff, because that can cause a lot of stress for kids. Movement decreases the stress hormones that build up in our brains. So going for a walk. When I had students who had, if they exploded in the class, I'd send them on a walk around the building and have them come back, and they were usually calmer by the time they came back, if they came back. But that's another story. Okay. Rehearsal, giving them opportunities to practice what to say in stressful situations, giving them a script, because when they're hit with a stressful situation, they may not be able to pull from their brain what to say or do. But if you give them opportunities to practice, give them, here's an example of what can happen. Don't just tell them, have them practice it. That can go a long ways to helping them in stressful situations in the future. Do-overs. They are learning. But if they make an error, what I refer to as a behavioral error, then they can be punished for it, but what did they learn? That they shouldn't do that, but they don't know what to do instead. So take those as learning opportunities when they make mistakes, and give them a chance to practice so they can get those neurons to fire in the pattern you want them to fire in. And if they practice it, it's more likely to happen the next time. But if you just tell them, less likely. I've been talking a lot about the prefrontal cortex and some of the key things that happen there. These are all part of the executive functions. We've already mentioned some of them. Here are some more. Thinking critically, accessing working memory, doing reflection. We can help develop these parts, these executive functions, by helping our adolescents predict outcomes, give them scenarios. So what do you think is going to happen if you make this decision in this situation versus the other? Evaluating their work using rubrics so they have a comparison. Have you ever gotten an assignment and you have a score on it and you have absolutely no idea why you got that C or D? If we give them a sense of what we were looking for or what we are looking for in behavior or assignments, that will help them kind of be able to work on those skills. Questioning. Being questioned by their peers or by adults about what they're doing, why they chose what they chose to do, what decisions they would make in the future, and that can lead to helping them do their own self-questioning. So having them ask their own questions so they can reflect on their work and the behaviors that they do. Share their findings with other people so they can get feedback on the decisions that they make. And then last but not least, writing in a journal can really help adolescents develop those executive functions because they can go back and evaluate what they were thinking at a point in time. When I was preparing for this presentation, I ran across this strategy. It's aimed more at elementary school students, but I think this can really help adolescents. I really liked it for a number of different reasons. One is it gives adolescents a series of different questions to ask and different ways to look at a situation or a problem. I'm not sure if you can see this very well. My PowerPoint will be available on the website, I think, so you can see this better. But it starts up at the very top with the basic, with just the facts. And then as you move down the table, it has the student record more specific information, including problems with a decision that was made, feelings, recording those feelings. What are the possibilities with that situation? So I think this gives kids a framework. Instead of just saying, think critically, ask yourself questions, this gives them what to ask. Because until they know those things, they won't be able to do it. They won't know what to look for. So I want to end with a few things. One, it's really important for us to remember that teenagers' brains are not broken. They are still under construction. That is really important for us to remember and to articulate to our colleagues and other people who are working with adolescents. We cannot forget the impact of stress, especially the youth that you may be working with, the different stressful situations. Focusing on how we can reduce their stress, because once we do that, then they can be more successful in other areas. And as adults, it's really important for us to provide support for the growth of those neural connections that we want to see. Helping the pruning process in the brain so that they develop the skills and knowledge that they need to be successful adults. And when we do that, oh, the places they'll go, right? Even though this will still happen. I know this one, oh, I knew that one. But we can give them the strategies that they need to be successful and the understanding of what is happening in the brain. On your tables, I wanted to provide you with a reminder that you can carry throughout the day today. There's some brain erasers and some Dr. Seuss pencils, oh, the places they'll go, oh, the places you'll go. Please take those with you and hold them dearly as you go through the other sessions today to just remind you about what we talked about, the brain and what's happening in the brain and what we can do as adults to help build those connections for you. Thank you so much for letting me be here today and enjoy your day.